Welcome everyone to the IMUG meeting for February 2011. We're very glad to be in this new location at Google and hope you enjoy the facilities. As most of you know, but I'll just go through this for those that don't know, IMUG is the original multilingual computing user group. It was founded in 1987 as part of the Stanford Macintosh Users Group and spun off as an independent MUG in 1991. Since then, we've met almost every month on corporate campuses around Silicon Valley, including Apple, Adobe, and Google. We've grown to cover all platforms and all topics of interest to globalization professionals and multilingual users of all types of computers, smartphones, and more. And now, just say IMUG, and maybe the M stands for multilingual. I'd like to thank our volunteers, the IMUG volunteers, Joe Katz, who's our marketeer and general social networking person who's gotten all of our social networking going and was able to bring you all here tonight. And Reem, our new host, Reem Yazigi, is our new host at Google. She's been very helpful in setting this all up, and we very much appreciate her support. And Parissa Glazer is our registration person for tonight. Thanks go to her as well. I'd like to point out that, just a second. Press enter. Maybe here. There we go. Any of you people, if any of you people are into Twittering, here's our hashtag, IMUG408. That's the area code for San Jose, basically. And please participate if you're into Twitter. Take a look at some of the jobs that are available for internationalization professionals. We have 5 different jobs at 4 different locations. If you want to take a look at them, just check them out at imug.org/jobs. And we have some upcoming events for IMUG. Next month, we won't be meeting at Apple or Google. We'll be meeting at WorldWare, the conference that's basically for corporate management types who want to learn more about how to get localized products out the door and the whys and wherefores about that. And then the next month, we'll be back here at Google for a presentation about mobile app localization as a service, LAAS. A Google alumnus, Brendan Clavin, will be talking about his new company, Tetris, and how he proposes to serve the community with localization as a service on the web. And if any of you have any suggestions for future topics, let us know. We're always interested in suggested speakers or topics. Send your ideas to me, roger.sherman@sr.com. One interesting thing about that next month's meeting, it's going to be sponsored by two companies in the localization area, and LingoPort and Acrolinks. And so basically it's 2 short talks and a lot of networking and food. So I hope you will enjoy that meeting. It's going to take place at TechMart in Santa Clara. And as you probably know, we have all of these social networking sites available to you, courtesy of Joe, and I hope you take advantage of them all. Tonight's speaker, Ruzbe Pornadar, is an expert in localization, internationalization, and he's from a country that has a bidirectional language. So I'm sure he's had a lot of experience with the issues involved in localization of bidirectional languages. I'll tell you, we've been wanting to get a speaker to handle this topic for quite some time. Several months ago, I contacted him and I found out that he's quite busy. So I'm very glad that he's been able to come to IMUG tonight and share his knowledge about how to create software or websites that support bidirectional languages. So thank you very much.
So yeah, hi everybody. First of all, thank you, Roger, and thank you for coping with all the kind of troubles I created for you along the way. I was pretty hard to reach for quite a few times. So, and also thanks a lot for all the organizers. I may disappoint you a bit. I mean, some of those who have been in my talks in the Unicode conference or in WorldWare, I've reused most of the stuff. So that was the suggestion of the hosts, that this is basically the audience may want to hear those things and they may have not been there. So that's what's gonna happen. And some of you guys are, I think, very, very good BIDA experts. I see Aharon there. And I mean, I really do not have much to add. What I'm going to try to cover here is basically cover the grounds and see really what's there. So I'm Ruza Purnader. I lived in Iran until around 3 years ago. I started my own company there. We did localization for Persian mostly and internationalization for Persian. And it seemed that, I mean, then we kind of really got involved with Unicode and everything. And I've been a contributor to Unicode, I think, since more than 10 years now. Yeah, more than 10 years now. And some people in this room, again, like Jungxing, I've worked online with for, again, more than 10 years when Mozilla was started or various other open source projects were started, or TextVector. So what I do is mostly at High Tech Passport. We're a software localization and internationalization company. And my role there is a really weird role. I call myself the master of useless information. And that's what they once told me. A client was asking us a question about differences in Easter in different European countries. And we kind of snapped the answer. I mean, yeah, of course, we have the Eastern Western and the Western Easter and the Eastern Easter, and the Armenians and the Copts have them differently. And he kind of answered, wow, you guys know so much useless information. And I mean, it was useful to him, but still, this is still useless information if, well. So these are the general kind of markets, and as it goes, it's increasing. I mean, what you're hearing, what you're seeing in the list of languages to do, people are not only into Arabic and Hebrew anymore. They're doing Urdu, Persian, maybe for Iran, maybe for Afghanistan, Pashto for Afghanistan, Kurdish for Iraq, which is now a official language of their Uyghur for China, which is again official regional language, Divehi for the Maldives. Urdu again was very interesting. Some of our clients, for example, didn't even know that Urdu was right to left. They were saying, okay, we want language of India. And okay, we've covered these, and then Urdu is also one of the official languages. We want Urdu too. And they even didn't have BIDA. Even before Arabic, they wanted Urdu. North Africa, Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia. Can anybody give me an example of BIDA language in Southeast Asia? Jawi is a famous example. I mean, one of the languages of Indonesia and Malaysia. So, although there's not much market for it. Yeah. So, and that's the list I'm putting down there. These are some of the interesting countries. And the name that always comes up is emerging markets. Different organizations define them differently. But Saudi, Israel, India, Egypt, Morocco, Kuwait, Jordan, UAE, Pakistan, Malaysia, and China are considered some of those. And with what's happening in the Middle East and North Africa these days, it seems that more of those countries would be opened up. we're meeting. I wish to take this moment to also say that we're meeting in a room called Benghazi, and Benghazi is a city in Libya, and very probably more than 10 protesters were killed during the protest there. And my home country of Iran also kind of there were protests again on Monday, and then again there were deaths, there were arrests, and it's not very happy times for me personally. Okay, this is what I came up to try to explain to some people who are not exactly sure that we really need to do BiDi. Kind of convince them that we should. Just consider using this as an English interface. Let's just assume that you are asked to use this kind of a UI. I'm not talking about it being GNOME or something, but this general kind of a UI with these kind of directions and text appearing like this on a daily basis when you're just doing English. That's exactly how would it feel for a BiDi user, for an Arabic or a Persian or Hebrew user to use your left to right UI. And believe me, some of our clients, again, have insisted that yes, we want to do Arabic, but we want it left to right. We don't have the money for doing BiDi. So, just explaining a few things, as you can see, I mean, it's pretty hard to see things that come first on the right. File usually comes first in a UI, and you really want that on the left side, because that's where you assume things start, because you write left to right. Or, this is very interesting, this 5 ways to lead a healthier life. That's an actual example from a very large software company who has a localized to Arabic mail service. And this is an email that came from their own marketing. This is the subject of that email. 5 ways to lead a healthier life. And if you display that email in the Arabic, it was in English, the subject line. And if you switch the UI to Arabic, that's how you saw it. Was it Google? No. The second line is also very interesting. It says, I like BBC very much. What about you? BBC is what some Arab locals localize Pepsi, the famous drink, to. And some others also just keep it in English. So what you would actually see in an Arabic world is that I like would actually be in Arabic. BBC would actually be in your Latin the script in English, let's say. And then the rest would also be in Arabic. But that's also the kind of feeling they would get when they put something that's English inside an Arabic script text. That's as easily as you can read this, they would have problems with that. And then that's 2 + 2 = 4, not 4 = 2 + 2. Again, you see similar things there that are just really problematic. Honestly, I can't really explain more than this why software should be bidirectionalized. When a client doesn't get it after something like this, I really can't usually go much forward. We just repeat ourselves usually. So I'm kind of trying to divide this talk into certain parts, and one is strategy, the first one. So famous quote, I think some of you heard it so many times, that internationalization is not a feature, it's the way you design your software, it's the way you kind of do things in a certain way in order for it to be localizable or be sold to various markets. So what we're calling bidirectionalization is just a subset. Oh, I need to explain that word too. So I came up with that word with my friend and colleague Michael Everson. So not rather new, but just following the pattern of localization and internationalization. Just like IATN, it's an ongoing process. So what you usually do there, the software companies here mostly do, if they don't really have enough budget, they usually design a phase, say we want Arabic or Hebrew or both, and they rush it, they get some experts in, they do it, and then they assume it's going to stay there, and it doesn't. What happens is that people are just going to add features, and every single feature you add, you really want to make sure it works fine before BiDi. People usually tend to ignore that, so they assign a certain kind of budget for adding BiDi, and then they don't kind of continue doing that anymore. They assume that it's going to be there, but it's not. The really sad story is that we treat it as feature. Some companies still treat internationalization as a feature too. They pay the price, but well, they do. So again, usually there are different approaches. I'm mostly gonna talk about minimizing cost, and some people really want to just really get to the market as soon as possible. And it really would depend on the strategy, on what the product is and how you want to do that. The exact the strategy would be very project specific. It's hard, but it's done, and lots of people do that. I think even, I mean, I've seen quite a few companies who are now in a rush to really market there, and they're really throwing a lot of money there. I'm not going to talk about really doing a rush job. It's complex and it needs a lot of expertise, and not everybody can afford it. Both can be done at the same time. I've done that a lot. But you really need your experts who have really done this if it's yours a large project, have done this for large projects, have done this several times, have done this for various companies. They really know what they're doing. So if you really, for example, want to achieve both at the same time, do it very fast and rather cheap, talk to me. Okay. Again, things I'm not going to exactly talk about, but I'm going to touch basically what I'm calling B18 and for platforms. You have a UI toolkit, you have a, I don't know, browser, a word processor, something pretty basic, and you want to do BiDi for that. That's very hard work. And that's going to usually take years if you want to do it very good. So, as I just said, I mean, grab your experts, every standard that's out there, read it, compare with everything that's out there, all the competing products, find exactly what your platform may do. There's still some platform under you. And then again, talk to more experts. I mean, everybody is still kind of struggling to get BiDi right on several platforms. I mean, Microsoft has, although they had a very good lead start, they're still kind of messing a lot of stuff up. Apple, interestingly, started very good, but then for some reason when they did macOS 10, they kind of threw everything out in the garbage can, and they restarted from scratch, and they're still far from being anything good. Google and Yahoo are struggling to have good platforms for that. Oh, 2 ones here, I didn't see that one. Okay. So what is doing it for localization? When you have a web app, when you have a piece of desktop software, when you have a, let's say, an iPhone application, and you want to market it, and your platform already does something. It's usually hard if your platform doesn't, because then you really need to do lots of hacks that you usually do in a platform inside the application. That happens, for example, for Android. I mean, when you want to do an Android app in Arabic, you really go through a lot of trouble because it doesn't exactly support right to left. Either you need a layer in the middle, a library in the middle that would do that for you, or you actually need to implement lots of stuff yourselves. And it's usually urgent from the projects I've seen. They just say, we want to do Arabic and Hebrew and Hindi and Malay for the next phase. And they just have not even, I mean, this is a typical client of ours, for example. They wouldn't think that, oh, I really need to do major changes in the library, in the platform, in the software, in the libraries to be able to do that for Arabic, for example. They just think that it's just localizable like everything else, like most everything. For Hindi, you will also need to do lots of stuff, but BiDi is pretty harder. So this is what I'm calling simple bidirectionalization. This is like a very simple recipe. And that's worked, interestingly, although it looks kind of too simple. First of all, if you don't have Unicode, don't even think about BiDi. You can do it. People have done it in the past. I mean, it's a lot of headache. When you do Unicode later, it's going to be another huge problem. So don't even think about doing BiDi unless you have Unicode. as a default. Even any other characters that you want to support it as a filter, something that you can import or export to. Even then, think if you really want to do that. It's a lot of headache these days, and Unicode is almost everywhere. Get your requirements, and that's, I think, is really the hardest part of the job. Create mockups. Just every user screen you have, just get it to your wider experts. They would tell you how to change everything, how to do it differently for the Arabic or Hebrew market, and then basically implement those. It's not very hard. For making your mockups, there's this thing I call the big switch. Usually for every platform, there is something like this. If your platform doesn't have this, you're not very lucky. You need to do some bidirectionalization for platforms, which is hard. Lots of web apps would not really need to do much at the beginning. There is this thing called dir in HTML that you just set it to right to left, and then you basically break your web app. Lots of things look really weird, and lots of things will still look left to right. I mean, Ahar is laughing, okay. And there's this nice tool that Google did and open sourced a while ago. It's the Python script mostly, called CSS Janus. Janus was that Greek god, I think, or goddess, I don't know, that looked both sides, had two heads that looked both sides. So that's the name. I don't know if the people who work on it or still work on it are in this room. It's very useful. I highly recommend using it for your web application. You basically pass all your CSS through it, and it comes up with right to left CSSs. It needs a lot of editing, post editing after that. You may even need to change the tool, but it's a pretty nice and clean tool. And I've how can I say that? I've customized it for a client, added lots of features, and it's not that hard. Or if it's that set process default layout is the Windows API key for doing that. You can call that function and set it to right to left, and then things would switch. Some of them you won't like, some of them you would like, and then you can go widget by widget and change them. Or for GNOME and Pango, that's the GTK widget set default direction. That's the function. You can get the screenshots and get them to your experts, and they usually know. They just look at them. Oh, this goes that way, that goes that way. There are explanations for those. I mean, so for example, there are things that still remain left to right. Numbers is a famous example. Some of them don't. Your BIDA experts would know. So a good example is, as I think I mentioned it before, is the notion of time. When you play something, let's say on a media player, a video, the thing goes from left to right and it kind of fills up. And that's usually the reason that happens is the notion of Western time, because that's also how they write in the Western world. You write from left to right, and time passes. So time kind of passes from left to right. And also things of more importance appear first, and first is, again, the way you write on the left. Those things usually change when you go to the Arab or the Hebrew world, or the larger right to left writing countries. But as lots of you know, it's not 100% fixed. Certain things still remain left to right, and some of them are controversial. So for example, the play symbol, it's not very exactly agreed upon that if you should mirror the play symbol or not. Some people want to mirror what's on the video VCRs, for example. The VCRs, when they imported them to the Middle East, they did not switch the keys. I mean, it wasn't worth the trouble to just like make the things right to left. So if you're creating a notion of something equivalent to the outside world, and the play button that's on the VCR, it looks left to right. So, or you may consider that conflicting, and you may want to switch. So not everything is very clear. Going back to your mockups, what you're going to do with your mockups is that after the big switch, you're basically going to find lots of workarounds. Oh, this is in that case, the Unicode BIDA algorithm works in this certain way, so I need to change that in that way. Oh, I need a library. You usually cannot really know those things unless you start with your right to left mockups, at least having played with the big switch. Just switch it and see what happens, and that's really your starting point. And there's a lot of really, really small things. The main problem that some people get into is that they really have no idea of how long that laundry list is. So they start with the big switch, they get their mockups or whatever is there, and they start doing them one by one, and it's a never-ending thing. So again, this is a place that you really need to have your experts. So, but the hardest thing in all of this is getting your requirements. This is what I've heard. This is what I've seen out there. And by saying global competition or local competition, I really mean companies like, let's say, global competition, people like Microsoft, people like Google, people like Yahoo. By local competition, there are lots of small companies, according to US standards, which are pretty large in their kind of local field. I mean, one of Aina was one example. Maktub was one example that Yahoo was bought by, from the Arab world. And there are other alternatives in the Hebrew world, some very interesting companies in South Asia, some interesting companies in Iran that are doing these things. And this is a very common approach. Just so some people think, I don't know, if Google is doing that, they're probably good enough. And I've seen it not working at all, because Google has other priorities, for example, when they do their right to left support. And when you want to just match that, you usually get a bit less, because then you find that your budget wasn't enough. And so you won't even be able to compete. You'll be laughing material usually. And yeah, Yahoo bought, for example, one of the local competition, Maktub, I think Yahoo bought that. So they kind of thought that we can't do it ourselves, or we're not exactly sure how to do it. Let's just buy these people who know how to do it and let them do for us. Funny things happen then. For example, usually what happens with local companies is that people who buy them find that they really understand the market very good. But the local companies don't really understand internationalization. They know how to localize for their own market. They know how to write software for their own market, but they don't really know how to work with all languages at the same time, have just one software that does everything at the same time. So what I really like is at the bottom of that list, doing research, finding what your users actually like, because sometimes your BIDA experts cannot be trusted either. Your BIDA experts are the people who kind of like to push the envelope. Really want to say that, oh, that idea, nobody ever implemented it. Let's actually push this client to implement that. And that's usually a bit expensive, to say the least. But in all of this, again, something I've always seen is that companies look at BIDA and think, oh, I don't want to do this. This is just like too much work. It's an opportunity, I believe. If you do it right, you will have customers that will never forget you. Again, recipes for disaster. I've seen a lot of these things. You get in the requirement list, you get lots of features, and then usually people who are assigning budgets, they kind of, not even in the beginning of the project, say, could we please not do this? Could we please not do that? And what usually happens, or the other side, these are people, sometimes your BIDA experts, sometimes your developer who really, really likes some feature. He finds that feature very, how would they say that, interesting to implement and test and see how users react to it. It may be really a power user feature. And I see a lot of those things. And those are really recipes for disaster. If you try to design your feature list of BIDA by committee or by kind of push and pull, what usually happens at the end is that some features get done, some others don't, and you see a very unbalanced thing. You see some, it would look like, your software was designed by your developers, and that's not very good idea for the buyer market. Although it may not look like that to you as a Western user, but a half-baked BIDA set would look like that. Then there is this thing I'm calling BIDA awareness, and that should be part of your feature list. People think it's just mirroring the interface and then not mirroring some parts and getting to that laundry list and just fix all the small things. What really happens in the world is that BIDA users, they don't only do right to left content. They work with also left to right content. they would get an English email. Everything would be in English. You remember that email, the subject line with 5 ways to do something? That was an English email sent to a Bida user. And the poor Bida user had no way of displaying that. The other way is also true. I commonly use left to right user interfaces, but I really want to be able to work with content. And this is, again, comes from personal experience. Let's actually mention Google products now that we're at it. Gmail has some rather okay Bida support. You can read and write Bida emails. Do you know how to do that? Not many people. I've seen so many friends, both in Iran and expatriates who live in the West, who have no idea how to enable the Bida support on their Gmail. The reason that happens is that it's in a really obscure place in their settings that they actually need to go there, display something, put a check mark next to something, and then they will be able to type right to left properly in an email, for example. And if they get there and find that check mark, they would consider themselves second-class citizens. If they don't, they would think, this is just broken. So it's funny that Google, for example, paid all that price, but the users do not find that. Yeah. And the reason, I understand why the reason for that was, there are Bida controls. For example, there are marks that say set this paragraph right to left or set that paragraph left to right. And it's going to be very confusing for some maybe ignorant Western user who doesn't even know that there are some right to left languages. He may try to use those for doing, I don't know, right alignment, and then things would really go crazy. So those things can happen, and the balance is not a very easy thing to achieve. These are the most famous, kind of more important market languages. Sorry for just jumping around. The whole idea is that there's these things that we need to cover for Bidi, and they just not very connected to each other. So on the left side, there's the list of languages and their most important market. Of course, I mean, every language is spoken in every country in the world. And Persian, for example, you would need to support Persian for Afghanistan maybe. But for every one of them, there's a major market. I mean, Urdu is also important for India, I just mentioned. Or Kurdish is important in Iran in the Arabic script, for example. Everything has a country, and that's what usually people in localization and internationalization like. People in marketing also really like that. But Arabic is really weird in that list. So it's like, I don't know, 24 countries, something like that, including Israel. Not many people know that. It's an official language of Israel too. There's this thing called Modern Standard Arabic, that there is some generally agreed upon definition of that. It's some kind of Arabic that's more like classical Arabic. It's based somehow on the grammar of the Quran. And most news media and most international Arabic stuff is written in that. And that's also what most people learn in school in the Arabic-speaking countries. There are some differences, of course. And month names are different. I mean, the jury is still out, but I think there are at least 4 or 5 different set of month names used in the Arabic-speaking world. Look at the Wikipedia article on that if you really wanted to see the differences. I don't have sources for some of those, but I think at least there are 5 sets of different month names for Arabic. Of course, the Arabic Wikipedia. There are preferred digit shapes that are different in North Africa and the Middle East. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. And there are transcription systems. There are some letters that you're going to see in some Arabic letters that you're going to see in Saudi or Emirates that you're not going to see in Tunisia or in Algeria, and vice versa. So, for example, it's commonly known that the Arabs do not have a sound for the V sign, like in victory. And when they try to write that sound, they use a letter. They use a fe, for example, with 3 dots above it in the Middle East. But if you move to North Africa, it's the same letter, but the 3 dots will be under it. Or with a ge, with Samsung, for example. Samsung, would be written differently in Tunisia and in Emirates. So back to numbers. Okay, the fonts are okay. So there are three sets of BIDA-related numbers in the Unicode standard. Of course, there are lots of other digit sets in Unicode, but these are the three you're going to be concerned about. The European ones are what you've heard about, and people usually call them Arabic numbers because the Europeans got them from the Arabs. What happened is that the Arabs got them from the Indians. So the Arabs call them Hindi numbers. And there are some revisionists, for example, in Iran, that call them just Persian numbers. They just ignore the history. So Unicode just... So Unicode, kind of to try to avoid that confusion, try to come up with some names that I think you should also try to use in the I-18N world. So European numbers are what Europeans use, and East Asians, and most everybody in the world. And then these Arabic Indic digits, these are the set that most Arab countries are going to use. And then there is this extended Arabic Indic digits, and those are the people who actually changed it a bit through Persians. So in Iran, they took the Arabic forms and they changed it a bit. And then Central Asia and South Asia, those of them who write in the Arabic script, like Pashto in Afghanistan, various languages of Pakistan and India, they took it from the Persians, so they took the Persian forms.
So there's 3 threes? Or is that 3 fours?
I didn't get to catch the question.
Is there 2 threes or 2 fours?
2 3 or 2 4s?
There's 1, 2, 3.
It's the same numbers, 0 to 9, in every system. Some of them are different. If you look, for example, the shape of 4, 5, and 6 are different in the font I'm using up there.
So there's just a 4.
Yeah, the 4, 5, and 6 are different in that font. But then again, if you get to Pakistan, the 7 shape would be different from although the same digits would be used. And it's not also in Unicode standard, it's not only the shapes that are different, but also there are some, the BIDA class of is a bit different. Not necessarily by design, the design may have been a mistake, but there are some differences. But also that's the forms you want to use.
The Google translation input for Urdu gets it wrong for numbers.
Really?
It does them for Arabic way and not the Farsi way.
Oh, okay. Nice to know that.
Copy-paste it from the wrong place.
Oh, okay. So, but yeah, the codes, you can also find them. I mean, there's a very good section in the Unicode standard talking about the basics of this. So just look at the Arabic chapter in the Unicode standard and explains the differences. And those are again the countries that kind of use each set of the numbers. What happened is that in reality, there's a lot of headache, especially on Windows. So when Windows was doing Arabic, Unicode wasn't really there. So they started doing Arabic, I think, with Windows 3.1 or 3.0, and they only had 8-bit character sets. So what they did is they kind of made the European numbers rather fancy. So what happened is that you would have just one set of numbers. They didn't have enough space to put an additional set of numbers in their character set, code page 1256. So what they did is they added a feature to their various products, including Windows, that you could automatically show the European numbers as Arabic Indic numbers. So you could put a check mark somewhere in your Windows settings, and if you put that check mark, which could be there by default, I don't even know in which products it's there by default and which products not, the numbers would be European, but they would be displayed as Arabic Indic. And you could remove the check mark and everything would be European. And there was also this advanced settings that the numbers would be either European or Arabic Indic based on context. Of course, based on an internal Microsoft algorithm that changed in every product, so you couldn't really even figure out how it worked. So it's a headache to try to handle that. Still, Microsoft doesn't properly handle Arabic digit numbers everywhere. In Excel, for example, you type Arabic Indic digits, and it may not parse them as a number. It may parse them as a string. Or when you use an Arabic keyboard on the latest version of Microsoft Windows, I still, again, do not follow every change, but in almost latest versions, I'm quite sure that it generates European numbers. Although the country may be Saudi Arabia, which they really insist on Arabic Indic numbers for display. Of course, the user is recommended to just go and check that thing on and off. But you don't really want to do that or assume that that feature is on or off. If you want to do Windows software, for example, you actually need to test for all different settings. It also creates lots of problems for those of us who work in localization and use formats like Trados that use Microsoft Word for localization. Also, Microsoft Word has some very interesting features there that really breaks everything. My recommendation is when you write in your code, in your software, generate the right Unicode code point. And if you can control the system to turn off all this intelligence, do that and control it, just so you would be able to just generate the right thing. When you recognize the numbers, recognize everything, because you can't really know what the user is actually seeing. So the user may see the right thing, or the user may type using a very different keyboard layout. So you really want to recognize all the forms. The sort of carpet I'm talking about there is what really happens is when you're localizing or when your translators are localizing, they may see the European 7 as an Arabic Indic 7. And so what happens is that they would think it's the right code. So your engineers really on this side need to make sure that the right codes are used, because your linguists cannot be 100% trusted, because they may have that automatic feature on for a different client who doesn't care about those differences. So they would think, yes, I just follow their style guide, and they haven't. Just talking about other non-binary requirements of the same markets, icons and graphics are always dangerous. It would really depend on your application. The plus sign, or what you see right there, in the Western markets, that's an addition. But there are some conservatives in the Middle East that consider that a not very good symbol. So, and there are textbooks that when they teach addition, they remove the lower part of that. So it would just like just see the tree, the top and the two left and right side. You would not see the lower part. And Unicode even has a character for that, just for that purpose, because some people would consider that a symbol of Christianity. You will see the same thing with the asterisk. You just like do it for a footnote. But then again, some conservative Muslims consider that a Star of David. So they go for a 5-pointed star. And again, Unicode has a character for that too. You learn that maps and flags are bad for I-18, and you hear that so many times. They're worse for the BIDA markets. People happen to be generally more aggressive about what they think. And you can't really get the map of Kashmir right with India and Pakistan and China all around it. And you can't get the map of Israel and Palestine right. Nobody would. I mean, you can't get at least two different parties agreeing on what you want to show maps to. The flag of Israel also, for example, is very controversial. Not even the flag of Israel. I mean, the flag of Iran is controversial. There are some expatriates who really hate that. Just like things just get more complex when you do these kind of don't do things in IT and for BIDA. Playing cards, chess, games the Islamic people don't really like those things. Again, religious symbols, which may just simply slip in. I mean, it may be a patriotic symbol in the US, but it could be considered very religious in the Middle East. Place names again. Jerusalem is the most famous example. You don't want to call your time zone necessarily Jerusalem or necessarily very explicit. Or if you do that, you really need to make sure that you also add Al-Quds, the Arabic name, because that's also very controversial, or something else. The icons are interesting. For example, when you do that, you see the difference between here, right? Yeah, it's very obvious to me. When you want to have a back button, and you want to do a back for the Arabic or Hebrew user interface, you just don't mirror it. If you mirror it, things would look a bit off. What you do is you keep the light source at the top left, and that's how these arrows look. Basically, for every icon that you want to mirror for your user, You just don't mirror it graphically. So that's one of the traditions there too. There's not exactly a why that this happened. Theoretically, we could just move the light source up there to the right, but that's not how it got done. So this is a tradition. And then you need to make sure that some icons may need to be localized. Famous example is the question mark. The Arabic question mark is the mirror image of that. So your Bidi expert who may come from an Arab world may say, oh, of course, the question mark icon should be mirrored, but not for Israel, because Israel still uses the same European question mark. So this is actually a question of localizing context. This is something I came up, for math, you may want to do something like that, square root of x, but that's the Arabic version for some Arabic countries, but not all. Some Arabic countries write their math right to left, and they mirror everything. Some Arabic countries just use European math. And if you're careful, you figure out, I think the lighting on this thing is wrong. Multiple calendar is a famous example. The Gregorian calendar is used everywhere. You have the Hebrew calendar, which is the lunisolar calendar in Israel. You have the Persian calendar in Iran and in Afghanistan, which is a solar calendar. And you have the Islamic calendar in most of the Islamic world. These are basically sorted on the order of hard to implement. Some people have really struggled with the Hebrew calendar. You go further down list, things are not even easily defined. You want the Islamic lunar calendar, you don't even exactly know what country is following which rules these days. And again, the default calendar may be different. And this is a famous example of Iran and Afghanistan. We don't use the Gregorian calendar by default. We have it on our calendars, but it's just one of the three that we use. This is a sample user interface of it's done by my friend Behdad, who these days works at Google Waterloo. So this is how you would like an application, a calendar application for an Iranian local look like. You see 3 numbers in every cell. The one at the top is the Persian calendar. The one at the bottom right is the Islamic calendar. And the one at the bottom left is the Gregorian calendar. And you want all 3, and you want them displayed, for example, in Persian digits. If you wanted to do that, make sure you use existing code. It's rather hard to get it right if you want to do it yourself. Even the best books in the market on the algorithms do not really cover everything. So places like ICU, they make sure that the best knowledge of the industry at the moment is gathered there. But even that is very far from what's being used on the ground in the real world. So if you have higher standards, talk to me. I've done that, for example, for Iran, and I've advised clients for the Arabic market. But the real key is don't do it worse than the others. Just use what everybody's using. Just use ICU. You're gonna be okay. Nobody would gonna blame you that you're bad. And the other thing in calendar is interesting. You have 13-month years. For example, for the Hebrew calendar, you need to be ready for those things. You may have something like I'm calling rushing months. You have moving months. You moving holidays in the US, for example. The Easter is and the holidays around that are moving. And Martin Luther King Day is moving, for example. The first Monday of something is not a fixed date. Those are considered moving holidays. But then again, in the Islamic world, you have a moving holiday. The first of Ramadan, for example, the holy month of fasting, that moves. But then it may change yesterday. It's in the evening, and then the authorities say that, oh yes, we've seen the moon. We've seen the crescent of the moon. So instead of the day after tomorrow, tomorrow is the holiday. In my personal life in Iran, that happened. That it was in the morning of a day. When I left home, we were going for some hiking. When I left home in the morning, it was considered the last day of the holy month of fasting. When I got back home around noon, my mom said, oh yeah, it was announced that today is the Eid, so we can eat. So even on the same day, the date may change of today. So that's what I'm calling rushing holiday. And that day, which wasn't a holiday, became a holiday on that day's morning. And there are also non-Gregorian recurrences. If you have an anniversary or a birthday, don't assume that person celebrates it on the Gregorian calendar. I happened to be born on April 1st, but that day is not always my birthday. I celebrate my birthday on the Persian calendar, so it moves around.
More or less pricing stuff, right?
Doesn't work. I tried. So, is there any question about the calendars? I thought somebody was to ask something. Okay.
Weekends in different Arabic countries are different.
Weekends are different too. True. Weekends are different too. And again, depends on the country. Some countries take it on Thursday and Fridays. Some countries are doing it on Fridays and Saturdays. Some are just doing Western. They're doing Friday. They're doing Saturday and Sunday.
Some are just doing Friday.
Yes, just Friday. Yeah, yes.
So you said get ready for rushing holidays, and what can you possibly do in software about the authorities changing what today is?
Very interesting question. Let's talk about it after the talk. I did even implement some of those things. Yes.
Yeah, from your experience, when you have in Iran the Islamic calendar, the paper Islamic calendars that you had are printed, so you can't see them, right? Some of the months sometimes are 30 days, some others are 31, and some others are 29.
Yes.
So do you usually have the 3 days, and just you said if you turn the page today because it's 29, not 3 days?
No, the Persian calendar is fixed. So the Persian calendar is pre-computed. The Islamic calendar changes. So the dates. So on each page you see the main Persian date very large, and then the Gregorian date, which is again fixed in smaller font, and then the Islamic date. The Islamic date, the printed calendar may go wrong when they move the months.
Right.
So you just know that, oh yeah, this is the month of Ramadan was moved a day forward or moved a day backward. People would just know that. But the printed calendars would have problems.
And then how do you expose that on the software?
On a software, you just, when you find out, you would need to update your software, or if it's a web service, you would need to update your data. I have some ideas. Again, let's continue that in the Q&A. I can tell you what. So, regarding your implementation, my high recommendation is don't reinvent the wheel. There's lots of stuff already done. In ICU, for example, which everybody again has a way to use it these days. A lot of the work has been done in the free software stack. Pango does a lot, FreeBD does a lot, GTK Plus does a lot, and lots of people use those things, and they've debugged them. Don't go and implement the Unicode Vital algorithm again. CSS Jane is a very good example of what Google has done and contributed to the world. And YUI3, this is the Yahoo, for JavaScript, the Yahoo UI library in JavaScript, those three rather small things that I have done personally when I was helping Yahoo and they agreed to open source those pieces. For a text input box, because HTML doesn't support things, you would want to do things for a text, for a larger, how would you say that, HTML editor inside a web app, you may want something. And lots of those stuff are available as open source software for free. And it will save you a lot of debugging time. But again, there are bugs, and your customers may want different things than what's available. So really make sure you test them heavily. Use open source software as much as possible, or software you can completely control. You want to change things, and you're gonna find very much near the end of the project that there is this basic bug in the library that's causing all of this. You want to be able to fix that instead of implementing a really crazy workaround. Know your platform and limitations. Web is a famous example, and some people in this room are really working very, very hard, and I really appreciate that, to try to fix that for future versions of the web platform, which are, I don't know, they're going to probably be widely available everywhere 10 years from now, unfortunately, because we can't even get rid of IE6. So just know how web is different regarding BIDI. For example, when you do web software, you don't really have any automatic detection. Every single piece of text, you need to specify if you have that info, and if it's different, it's direction. So on a page, you need to say this page is left to right or right to left. Otherwise, things would be assumed left to right, or they would assume the direction of their parent elements, generally speaking. So basically, you would need to just go everywhere. And if you have, let's say, a right to left interface that shows, let's say, emails in Gmail, for example, in Arabic, and then you want to display a left to right email, you need to find out that email is left to right, and in your software, in your web application, set the direction of that piece of the screen that shows that email to left to right. You really need to control everything there, and you can't really trust the platform to know anything. And that's created lots of problems. For example, that's one of the reasons those JavaScript libraries I told you about earlier. Flash is still going really crazy. Different versions do really crazy things. Talk to Adobe people. I haven't really touched it with a flagpole. On mobile, the real headache is still that Android doesn't really support BiDi properly. You want to do your own library or your own really cooked up version of BiDi. And the desktop, you can trust Microsoft doing its work well enough. Also on the GNOME platform, you can have it fine. Mac is a bit not very obvious what it's doing. Go for standards. That's the other thing we've seen. Anytime you decide to, instead of a standard, go for supporting a certain way, a certain library is doing something, that library in a later version, 2 years from now, is going to change and implement the actual standard. Then your software gets broken. So what you usually should do is actually assume that things worked according to the standard and do it that way, and then implement workarounds only for the bugs in the platform that you're using. Yes.
When you say that Mac doesn't know what it's doing, can you explain it more?
Yeah, the platform is kind of still shaky, and different versions do different things. The BiDi features are not exactly kind of clean. They don't still even behave according to the Unicode standard for the BiDi in the text editor and stuff like that, for example. It has its own version of BiDi, and it still needs a bit of time to converge. With macOS 10, basically, they broke all of BiDi. So, and they haven't really caught back to where they were before.
iOS support the BiDi pretty well.
Excuse me?
iOS on the iPad.
iOS is much better.
Yeah.
iOS is much better than macOS with BiDi.
Have you tried text edit in Snow Leopard?
Excuse me?
Text edit in Snow Leopard.
No, I haven't.
But that's the problem. That's the problem rendering BiDi. Because not joining the phrases and all these things.
The bigger problem in the macOS is it does not support the UI mirroring at all.
Yeah, you are something else.
Yeah. Okay. So again, something I've seen a lot with clients is that they're worried about performance. And already Unicode and internationalization make your application slower and larger for various different reasons. And BiDi would just add to that. And you're going to have a fight if you're working on BiDi with your performance people. They don't really like your ifs here and there. You're going to have lots of ifs here and there. And they would think, well, I mean, how many people are actually using Arabic or Hebrew in your software? Could we just do this for them, come up with a localized Arabic version that has these magic features, and let's just forget it for the English speakers? And guess what happens? That doesn't get tested and really breaks things. Apart from that, all of your Western direction users would simply be restricted only to left to right stuff, which you can actually have BiDi for them somehow for free. It's a real headache usually to only enable BiDi for your BiDi languages. And you usually pay the price during the QA phase. The other thing is, some people kind of try to see, this is a problem, maybe I can do it faster. That's not only a headache for you later when you try to import or export some content or text from something. That also becomes a problem for everybody who's working for your software. You copy and paste text from this to that and it doesn't work. Microsoft is still doing that, unfortunately. People who were at the Unicode conference saw that. They have a specialized version of the BiDi algorithm in Excel. And they have a specialized version of the Unicode algorithm for localizing Microsoft software. And of course, they're kind of exposing some of that to the people in the industry, saying that this is how we changed it. But then again, you can't even properly cut and paste between Microsoft products. You copy and paste something from Excel to Microsoft Notepad, and things will break.
Notepad is
Not that much. Nota is actually much better than Excel in my opinion. Regarding Bidi, sorry, I'm not doing my math in Notepad. Okay. Yes. Here.
The 24 is wrong.
Oh, something happened. Something happened. Okay, something happened. Okay.
Arabic holiday and he lost today.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah, there was also a numbering issue. There was something that I called both of them the number one, if you remember. I mean, so it's all between conversion between PowerPoint and OpenOffice and all that. Just everything is something like that happens. Sorry for that. But very good catch. Yeah. Oh, text it? Okay. Text you. I think Text has heard this for the third time or something. That's the reason he's not paying attention. Okay. Now's a good time to actually talk about this thing that we kind of introduced again here in the Western market. We've been using that in the Middle East for quite a while, but interestingly, there is this thing we're calling inside my company, High-Tech Passport, we're calling Bidi localization engineering. And I just want to kind of mention that I found it really weird that people here are rarely doing this. And it's very obvious to me. What usually happens is that you pass certain strings to your localization company or your inside linguist or something to translate to Arabic and Hebrew. And they have all these placeholders, %s for strings, or these days you would say brace 1, brace, something like that. And they would localize those things, and they really have no idea. They would just keep the placeholder where it is. And they would have no idea what that placeholder is going to be replaced with. That placeholder could be a number with a person sign, could be a number with a currency symbol, could be a user ID, which would be in English, for example. Could be something that could be either English or Arabic, could be a file path, could be anything. And your linguist does not know the Unicode Bidi algorithm. What it looks to them, it looks okay to them. And that's what they usually translate it to. And what happens is that strings comes to your developer, gets inside your build, and during your QA, when it gets to your local QA, you're going to see that string really garbled up. And you really have no idea what to do about that. You wonder, is it a translation issue? You get it back to a linguist. The linguist checks, nah, I did it right. So you get back to your developer. Developer looks, it looks okay to me. Then you find your Bidi expert. Your Bidi expert looks, oh, that's because you need to insert this Unicode control character here. That's usually what happens, and it's very, very expensive. We were recently doing some project for PayPal, and they introduced PayPal for Israel, a Hebrew version of PayPal. And we were their localization partner in High-Tech Passport. So at the beginning, we really insisted not only to save their costs, but to save our own costs, that we do this Bidi localization engineering for you. So what happens is that after the strings go to a linguist, we actually have engineers that receive those strings and know the Unicode Bidi algorithm by heart and all its details. And they actually go over the strings before passing to the client, insert those Unicode controls, and would know what's up and what to do, what to fix about that. As a result, PayPal was very, very happy. I think very few strings came back. Sherwin worked on that. I mean, maybe from thousands of strings, 10 strings came back.
We had something like 20, 25 words.
Yeah.
A few was coming from the back end with currency, the Hebrew currency, but the 5 or 6.
Yeah. And that's kind of incomparable to something like, if you hadn't, for example, done that process, you would have seen at least 10% of the strings with some problems. So I'm not saying come to us for this. I'm saying do this if you don't come to somebody who does this. Add a process after localization to inserting those controls. I think I need to close, and I'm already 6 slides over my 24 slides. So what you want to do is you don't want to simplify the standards. I already talked about this. it will bite you at the worst time ever. And Microsoft will gonna have that headache with what they did for Excel for years, I'm quite sure. And their users are gonna really hate it. Go with what some other people are doing, and that's innovation on top of the standards or improving the standards. So just assume that Unicode BiDi, for example, is there. You can fix it, you can change it. Just make something on top of it. Or if you want to change certain things, go talk to the other players. They know things. There are some reasons that those things are there. Don't just break it for your own product. You're going to have hell to maintain it for the rest of your life. Microsoft, for example, every software they do, they want to be able to open old Word files or old Excel files. And so they need to have it 3 different ways in the latest version of their software, or somebody's going to nag. The other thing is, please do not make us second-class citizens. That happens so many times. And that's another reason that lots of people in the Middle East, in North Africa, in South Asia, hate Western-made software. They may use it because they don't have any other alternative, but they still hate it. You tend to hide your features for right to left. You tend to require the users to actually really go and find something. You actually require them to work counterintuitively. And that's a really high price. You already pay a huge price for the BiDi work. Go a bit more, do it the right way. And again, don't assume that all your users are in the Middle East or want to use the Arabic interface. Even in the Arab world, there are people who work with Arabic content, and they actually use the left to right user interface. They're used to it. They just want to handle Arabic content. Just make sure your left to right software supports BiDi, your right to left software supports left to right. And there are, again, people like me who live here in the West. And believe me, there are quite a few of those. And those are very important customers of your software. So, open to questions. Excuse me, I don't know how much I'm over.
Yeah, we'll probably have 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
So we were talking about the fact that localized or linguists translate the English versions of the strings to Arabic, and then they have a variable and they don't know what to do with it. So if we take the example of I'm writing an email in Arabic on Gmail, for example, and I'm saying that I have tested your app, the app name is test in brackets 2.1, and I want to continue typing Arabic. We know, both you and me, that the first one of the brackets is going to come before the T of the text, and then you're going to continue, right? So I'm a regular user. Let's say it's my mom. I don't know anything about BiDi or anything, how it works.
Mm-hmm.
How are we targeting those kind of customers in terms of this kind of strings when they have?
Interesting question. Look at how Microsoft Word, for example, does it. I mean, I bash Microsoft, but they also do some stuff very good. So when you're handling plain text, for example, with plain text in context like Notepad, you're very restricted about what you can do and you can't do. You really need to follow the Unicode algorithm. But when you advance a bit to richer text, and in those places, for example, when you're composing an email, more and more these days, it's just HTML. You can actually be more intelligent and know from some context that certain parenthesis was actually a right to left or a left to right parenthesis. And then insert the appropriate either markup or Unicode control characters for BiDi control in the places you need. So it becomes more intuitive. All in all, my recommendation is look at how Microsoft Word does it and start with trying to mimic that. That's a very good start. That's much more intuitive than just like throwing the default Unicode BiDi algorithm in somebody's lap. Yes?
I know a lot of machine translation engine and companies are developing Arabic. They're covering Arabic. And do you know any quality, or do you have any company that you would recommend?
For machine translation?
Yes.
I generally don't recommend any machine translation for any language.
A lot of companies.
I understand that. I'm too much of a nitpicker, unfortunately. I mean, I'm not the best person to ask for this. I hate it when one word is wrong. I mean, let alone when whole sentences are just like totally different. Yes?
My question is about testing BiDi
for developing BiDi? Like, how about testing? What is the support there for testing BiDi?
Yeah, it's kind of a more complex story there of how your question is more about how you handle testing generally
Well,
for.
we can always do manual testing and have people who speak the language check out like the web page in their own language and tell us what's wrong and
Mhm.
what's not wrong. I'm more concerned about like test automation, for instance. Do we
Yeah.
have any ways to handle test automation?
Yes, you have, but it's again, you would, for example, you would want to make sure certain strings are always displayed okay. Let's say, as I said, you have this placeholder string that something person as something, and then you really want to make sure that any string that's out there, you really want to display it correctly. So what you actually do, I mean, if you do BiDi localization engineering, there are some marks there, and then you want to generate random strings that could be there, and then pass it through a BiDi rendering layer like FreeBD that I just talked about is open source and in C, and see what comes out, and always make sure that those parts stay at left and right and things don't break. So there are these things that you can try to automate, but then again, lots of these things are not even documented. How a certain software is supposed to work in a right to left context, even the experts may disagree. So some of this stuff can never be done until you actually look at the code and see, okay. So, sorry, I'm saying code, the output, and you say, or otherwise, this looks really wrong. And your BiDi expert may not even notice that that's going to happen early in the project. Only when everything is done, they may look, this looks very wrong.
I think even native users will catch only a subset of the stuff, what I've seen.
That's what I'm saying. Your BiDi expert, assumably, is already a native speaker anyway.
Google products are done that way. They get the native users, but then I was here for a talk last year with the international product manager on their calendar or something. In Hindi, I could see many obvious mistakes, like some same word was in one place translated into Hindi and other ways was just a phonetic spelling rendered for the same word on the same view.
Yeah, it's pretty complex. And something else I would recommend is that, now that brings me to I forgot to mention, during the Worldware conference, I'm also going to have a talk, which is going to be more towards the managerial people in I18N. And we're going to cover testing a bit. And my colleague here, Razvan Cornelio, is going to also share some of his experience regarding our PayPal project. We're going to be joined by PayPal people explaining from both sides of the table of what happened, how. And we're going to talk a bit more about testing there, and also regarding what to do when. I mean, it's a bit complex. For example, testing, for example, you do localization testing. And what happens is that if your BiDi localization, your BiDi support is not complete, you can't really test your Arabic strings because they may be displayed left to right, for example. And vice versa. If you haven't done your localization, you can't really test your BiDi interface because it's going to be English and things are going to look weird. So there are some problems there. So you may want to do some pseudo localization for the BiDi work and then do the actual localization and then test them everything near where it's done. So there are some issues like that. We're going to talk about that in the Worldware talk. Yes.
So I want to ask about pseudo testing. When is the best time to do the testing? The system testing phase by the functional QA people, or
when you do BiDi?
Yeah, pseudo BiDi testing.
Oh yeah. So I apparently started that thread. So the story, what I would recommend is during your BiDi enabling, as soon as possible, start some pseudo localization. For example, just replace every English letter with some corresponding Arabic letter, and pass those strings, and do some other edits too, and use that as a basis of your BiDi support. So that's, as the software is being developed, it needs to be tested. The BiDi features needs to be tested near that time frame, so you would have better communication with your development team. And it's gonna go on, and then later you're gonna have, when you get somewhere, you're gonna have your actual localization to Arabic or Hebrew, and then that's also need to be tested by those linguists or somebody who knows those languages very much near the actual localization process, so they could give feedback and fix things. And that's also a very good place to do a second phase of BiDi testing, because the actual Arabic or Hebrew translations would gonna bring out more BiDi bugs. I don't know if I answered you. Aaron, let it not be a hard question.
I have an answer, not a question.
Okay.
There was earlier a question about testing, automated testing for BiDi. And there's an open source product called BiDi Checker, which walks an HTML page in the browser looking for strings going in the wrong direction.
Who did that? I never heard about it.
We did.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. So you released it?
Yeah, just search for BiDi Checker.
BiDi Checker. Thanks a lot. I didn't know about that. Thanks a lot.
Does it work for mobile?
It works for any web page. So it runs inside the browser. It's JavaScript inside the browser.
But not for like native mobile apps.
If it's a web mobile app, it will work.
Okay.
And in fact, you probably wouldn't even run it on mobile. The device you probably run it in your desktop.
Right.
Yes.
So I was very interested in the part of your talk where you discussed, all the different subtleties of the different forms of Arabic and the different, kinds of digits and months and all that. And I think probably many of the people you talked to and some of us in the audience were like, wow, we'll never get it completely right. So I'm curious about sort of the idea of the perfect being the enemy of the good, or if there's a way to get something that is good enough to at least appease most people and so most people can understand, like, how do you walk that line between getting something that's perfectly localized and something that's usable, with limited resources?
What I would say here is that you can't really achieve perfectly localized unless you actually really live there, have been brought up there. I mean, I tried that in Iran, for example, and I could achieve some of that for one single market. I mean, we did a localized version of GNOME, for example, for Persian, deeply localized. And certain applications were removed, the date system was totally made different, certain things were highly customized, and all of that. And we did a few other things during my Farsi times. That was, until 3 years ago. But you can't really go there because you need to really understand the psyche of that nation, which is different for every nation or every even ethnicity that you're going to target. I mean, different languages of Pakistan would require different things. Users in Afghanistan would have different requirements than users in Iran because they look at things very differently. So you can't go perfect. What you want to do, I mean, assuming that some natives could go perfect, what you want to do is getting somewhere that people are comfortable using your software. And what I talked about is trying to balance those stories, really knowing why are you doing a certain feature. Not simply because somebody really asks for it too loudly. Just exactly know, what is this feature? Why do I need to do this? Is this because I'm going to sell more? Or is this because the users are not going to hate me? So that's what I kind of originally talked about not very well. I didn't really talk about it very well. But the idea I kind of try to get there is always have a reason for every feature and stick to those things, unless proven otherwise. Don't make your developers add or remove things, or your BiDi experts because they just like it. It's hard. It's very hard. Yes?
Along the same lines, how many of these subtleties, like the way you show the digits, are supported in the standard frameworks?
So many are there in the standard frameworks? More and more every day. That's my short answer. So the CLDR project, for example, that the ICU is based on, the Unicode CLDR project, which collects some of these information for various locales. So that's, for example, a very good standard a good place to look at for where to start from. They kind of collect the information on the basic information on, let's say, numbering system, the basic information on calendar, days of the week, and all that stuff. So an ICU, for example, is trying to support that because lots of the developers of the standard and of ICU are the same people. So in each version you see more and more. So, but then again, it really depends on your platform. As I said, Android unfortunately still doesn't support BiDi. The very, very basic things. And then again, Microsoft people still don't support different numbers, while ICU does. Very different question for everything. The other thing I want to mention here is that I just touched the surface. Other features by the markets that I talked about are just things that are well known in the industry. There are lots of things that are not well known, and it's just like, let's fix these first and we'll get there. But just like everything else, I mean, famous example, if you really want to do typesetting, which Adobe, for example, is very interested. I don't know how many Adobe people are here. If you want to do typesetting for some of the Arabic script locales, you want to use different font sizes for right to left and left to right text. Your 14-point Arabic font would be equivalent usually to a 10-point English font. So if you're doing, for example, an application that you wanted to display a piece of plain text from the web in a nice way, you actually want to go and analyze and find chunks that are in Latin and find chunks that are in Arabic and set them to different font sizes to get them right. I mean, there are so many of these small things here and there, and you go and first fix these and then talk to me about the rest. Yes.
There's some organizations like ISNA who are specifically with the Islamic calendar. They try to pre-calculate, when the month is supposed to change over.
Mm-hmm.
So is that kind of approach, like, do you find that sort of?
That's just one of the approaches. The Islamic calendar is very complex. So there are at least 24, around 24 countries with Arabic as one of their official languages. And there are lots of other countries with Arabic script used. I mean, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India are just some examples that Arabic script is used. Also some countries in Africa. And then when you go to actual Muslims, not only they're also in Southeast Asia and other places, they're also all around the world, the expatriate communities. So, and they all use different versions of the Islamic calendar. There's this thing they call the Islamic civil calendar, which they try to calculate using an arithmetic rule, like a Gregorian calendar. There is this thing called the astronomical calendar that people try to predict the phases of the moon and how it would look. So, and they would basically publish calendars based on their math, their astronomical math. There are things in between. For example, in Iran, I just use Iran as an example again and again because that's where I live, and this is the actual facts on the ground. In Iran, we used a mix of astronomical and moving calendar. So what happened is that they published calendars for the Islamic calendar, for example, and they pre-computed it for the next year. But except for 2 months, the months of Ramadan and Shawwal, those 2 months have a kind of special status in the Islamic culture. So what happens, for those 2 months, they said, we do not trust the published calendar. We actually go and observe the moon. But not for the other months. For the other months, if the observation was different, they would keep the calendar. In Pakistan and India, in some of the states, different states may actually start Ramadan on different months because they have different local councils that have different rules or different observation rules.
Even a rainy day can throw it off.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
In India, even a rainy day, they can't see the moon.
He's being facetious.
Exactly, text.
So, everything you're saying is true, but you're painting a picture of impossible complexity.
Really?
Let me just finish. It's impossible complexity. There are no standards that you can point at that say, no role models you can point at. Say the software.
I did.
Let me. No, and all of the platforms are not quite right. And the message here is very similar to, if you go back to even before European languages were not well standardized. The I-18N guys would get up in front of an audience and say, there's a great opportunity, and by the way, here are these details of sorting and character capitalization. It's all a mess, and nothing works. And I think what we ought to do is give this a little bit of context, because everything you're saying is true, and we know the difficulties. But the general case business application, right? If you're doing some basic business transactions, you're getting names and addresses, storing in a database and displaying it, and doing a few other things. This becomes a problem that's solvable. You're not going to get into all of that.
And that's the way to do it.
Let me just finish. I think you want to get to a point where you're as good as the platform that you're running on. If you've got a Windows application, it's okay to leverage Windows and its mistakes, because everyone else has the same mistakes. And then you can deliver something to the market that will be successful from a business perspective. It won't necessarily be as good, and certainly not as Rizko would like, and maybe not as the market would ideally like, but you can then do business in those markets. And to the extent that he's also suggested, don't do more than you need, and if you simplify, and that makes sense because all of these things are high cost, because unfortunately, although I18N is an architecture, not a feature, there is no BiDi architecture yet. There's no one who's saying, here's what you do to get one application that does BiDi and internationalization across the world. Since that's not there, that's why this is very high cost. But so go into it knowing that there's some cost. You have to be clear on the opportunity, minimize what you do, but recognize it makes sense for some applications. If you're doing business, it's fine. If you're doing gaming software, something that's very particular, if you're trying to do something that requires a lot of high touch with the user, well, then you're up for all of those issues. But most of us and are not, don't need all of that. Okay? If you're just doing something you're selling on a website, you've got some simple transactions going on, you can get the display to work. It'll be a little bit more costly than you'd like. You'll have some code variations, but it's doable. And so everything you said is right. But I think
I even said that.
When they walk out, the only way to do this is to hire you and pay a lot.
No, not at all. Text your. No. I actually text. I have very limited bandwidth. Number one.
I was being facetious. Everyone else knew I was being facetious, and I didn't mean to.
I understand that. No.
Anyway, so that I think, and I'll stop there.
Yeah. So sorry for not making some of those things clear. But what text is saying is correct, and I actually thought I in parts of my presentation I've been trying to pass that message too. That's, for example, when these slides came. I mean, I really think that this is doable, especially for your small application, and also for the bidirectionalization architecture. There are some people who really, not me. Some people are really doing a lot of work to try to make that happen. I mean, Aharon is a famous example of that. He's one of my heroes. Something happened. Yeah. So he's really trying to get not only one platform, but the standard fixed. So every platform would actually implement that. And he has a list of bugs that everything is public. And it's trying to get everybody to agree on a certain fixed platform. So your future web application would have much easier time.
Who was that?
Aharon back there. So for example, he's the lead in trying to get the BiDi fix for HTML.
But that's the future.
That's the future, and that's exactly as you said. I18N took a while to get here, and now everybody knows about Unicode. Unicode was one of those. I mean, I look like a clown circus trying to just show you all these different things, and I18N people were that 10 years ago, of course. Yes.
So, speaking of Unicode, we all experienced the political side of things. We went through Han unification and the whole drama. Can you comment on what kind of politics are going on in BiDi unification or getting some compromise? Because some countries will have to compromise.
Yeah, the war is these days. The war is mostly with Grantha and Tamil people in the Unicode world. Funnily enough. Yeah, the war is in the Indic world. So the Pakistanis kind of resigned. There were some politics involved quite a few years ago. They wanted to change the whole Arabic model and encode just composing dots for all the Arabic letters. So Tamil wanted to just rewrite everything and just burn the book and then kill all the authors and all that. So that's much more complex. But for Arabic, and the Pakistanis tried something. The Iranians were trying to do something. I kind of tried to stop them. Lots of countries always come late and then try to fix something. And sometimes they get new characters and get things fixed if they try to follow the model. but some of them come with this idea of, for example, again, sorry for using Tamil as an example because that's the issue of today. A famous saying in the Unicode world from the Tamil people is that Tamil is the only scientific script in the world. That's very judgmental, first of all. And I mean, of course, the Koreans are going to fight with them over who's more scientific. But if you come with... honestly, Korean is a very nice script. The Hangul script. Yes, and it's very bad. It's very... The best... One of the best scientific writing systems got really screwed up in Unicode. But, oh, really? I didn't know that. So...
Now we're going to have every culture is going to stand up and say,
yeah, I think that's really it. Yeah.
I think maybe that's, okay, we need a bit of networking time.
I guess the thing is, one of the things that kind of brought this question of the detail that we should go into these things was that maybe you didn't define the deep localization or deep internationalization to begin with.
I assume people know about these things.
Yeah, so what do you assume? So which amount is the default? Which amount they should go to? Should they go through the lunar or the
Yeah, that's what I was going to try to talk about, the feature requirements. So the idea is that try to exactly know why every feature is there. That's the thing. It really depends on. Let me not bring the slides, but it really depends on your customers, what you actually want to sell, who you actually want to sell to. It's not this grand scheme of I want to have the perfect software. It's not going to work. Make sure every feature has a reason. Thank you, everybody.